Alrighty, folks. Well, how did you like that finish? Martin Truex Jr. unofficially a short track race winner. We'll wait and see as we get more people here in the group. Our special Under the Lights edition here of the Last Car Disqualification Show. Let's get set up here. I'm going to share the link here as we get set up here, as we do every week. All righty. Okay. Get started here in a little bit. Yeah, maybe not the best overall race. I mean, we've seen this with a lot of events, certainly in the past in the sport, where you have a pretty mediocre race and then a good finish. I think that's always the age-old dispute, is the difference between a great finish and a great race. But this is certainly an example of that. Also shows really the importance of having a race reach its natural conclusion on the green. I know it seems like a strange thing to bring up in this context when you have the stage races and everything already interrupting the action. But at least it seemed like the last round we had enough time for people to get kind of strung out and see if people could be like comers and goers in that sense. So at least we had that a little bit. Okay, let's get that off of here. Alrighty. But of course, at the back of the field, the other part that we're looking at, this has ended up being a bit more of an unusual last place battle in the context of all the disqualifications that we had, or at least the pre-race penalties that sent people to the back of the field during the opening stages of today. When you had several drivers being sent to the rear. Originally, it was going to be Ross Chastain holding down the 37th spot in what was going to be the shortest Cup Series field at Richmond since 1994. Chastain, originally the last place starter, is the only driver that didn't turn in a qualifying lap during round one on Friday. But starting with Eric Jones, your outside pole sitter, we had several drivers dropped, had their times disallowed and brought back to the rear. Jones being the first of that group, followed by Chase Elliott, Daniel Suarez, Jimmy Johnson, Aric Almirola, Denny Hamlin, Matt Tifft, and Joey Gase. Gase starting next to last in the field, driving the tribute scheme to the late Sam Bass, who passed away in February. That paint scheme ends up starting in the last spot at the beginning of the race. During the opening stages there, during the first few pace laps, we had a couple cars fall to the rear. Chastain again fell behind the leaders there and behind Gase as well. And also falling back was Quinn Huff in the number 77 from the Spire Motorsports entry. It basically came down to Huff and Chastain being side by side when the race started. Chastain just edged ahead of Huff as the race started, and the 77 started to fall back from there. He couldn't keep up with Gase. Once Gase fell back to the 36th position, you had a race between these two drivers for most of the first two stages, and ultimately Gase was able to gap the 77 for most of it, which was good to see because motorsports business management the past year has had a real issue with keeping up the speed and trying to stay competitive out there. But in this case, they were able to be pretty consistently ahead of at least one car out there on a short track. So perhaps the short track kind of equalizing some deficiencies in the engines from one team to the next. And Huff pretty much was holding down the last spot pretty much uncontested until the accident that involved Kyle Larson in the number 42 McDonald Chevrolet. Unfortunate turn of events for him. He makes some contact with Daniel Hemrick during the later stages of the race. And lap 14 of stage 2, contact from Hemrick caused a flat tire. You had Larson come down pit road. He ended up losing some ground from there. His difficult start to the season continues. Only his top 10 finishes at Daytona and Atlanta, and then ultimately comes back out there. He had another tire apparently let go in turn one. Kyle Larson loses control, slams the driver's side of the car against the wall. Thankfully, he's okay, but the car was toast. He was originally over the radio communications. It sounded like Larson was going to come down to his pit stall, but he pretty much knew that the car was pretty much done for the day, so he already turned into the garage area. And much like we saw with Aric Almirola with his suspension issues at Bristol after he made contact very early in the event, Larson, once he went behind the wall, was out under the crash clock / damaged vehicle policy, and he was done for the day in the McDonald's Chevrolet. So a last place finish for him, the 6th of his career unofficially, as we now wait for the disqualification results to come in. Larson, as pointed out by another user on Twitter, now has more last place finishes than Cup Series wins. He has 6 now unofficially and 5 Cup Series wins. So difficult start to the year for him. First last place run. I mean, again, 1994 ended up being kind of the theme to the race here. Again, we mentioned this being the shortest field, only 37 starters in this race, the fewest cars that have started a Cup Series race at Richmond since I believe the March race of '94, when Dick Trickle finished last in that one after an accident on the second lap of the event. And also the first time that number 42 has finished last at Richmond since the fall race at Richmond in 1994, which was Kyle Petty's only last place finish driving the mellow yellow Pontiac. He had an issue there in the very early laps, and that was one of 16 last place finishes for Kyle Petty in his career, which is one more than his father. So an interesting statistic with that. The only other contender that came close to competing for the last place run once Huff was able to keep going on the track there was Landon Castle, who spent some time behind the wall with a mechanical issue, came back out there, finished multiple laps down and unofficially. So we still have, we're still waiting the results from inspection, but certainly Martin Truex, the big story here, but Kyle Larson and the continuing frustrations of the Chip Ganassi team, at least the Chip Ganassi number 42 team, Kurt Busch rather, having a great start still to the number 1 car, had a good qualifying run, was up there in the front near the first stage, kind of fell back a little bit. So ultimately didn't get as good of a finish as some of the other competitors out there, but still much better than the night that Kyle Larson had. So good to see Kurt continuing to have a great start to the season. Pulling up the unofficial results here again as we still look at what happened. A hard hit for Michael McDowell at the back of the field, having some issues there, finishing back in the 36th position. He took that from Landon Castle. Once Castle came back out on the track, the damage from McDowell, he tried to get back to pit road like Larson did, couldn't quite do it. Severe damage for the number 34. The Front Row Motorsports machine ends up finishing 36. Castle, Huff, and Gase rounded out the bottom 5. And it looks like, I believe, only McDowell and Larson finished. Oh, excuse me. Excuse me. Those two only McDowell and Larson finishing the race with DNFs. So unfortunate set of circumstances for them, but we still, of course, wait for the results from inspection as Martin Truex is now still holding down his first short track victory. Let's take a look here at other runs here in the lineup. So, again, a great run for Clint Boyer in the race, certainly. He had a good showing there in the number 14. It was good to see, so many cars kind of stacking up next to each other. I think, we're so used to a lot of races like where you have a good competition at the end. And then, unfortunately, you start getting a lot of cautions. Somebody spins out. The officials throw the yellow a little too earnestly. And then you don't really get to experience whether this person would have actually caught somebody else up front. But luckily, we were able to see that tonight, and that was really the advantage of that. So, so just again, looking at everybody else's comments here and your thoughts on the race. So Wrinklestein, you mentioned Chris Buescher. That certainly has to get mentioned. It was good to see him get a lot of attention on the broadcast, even from the early stages there when he was competing for a top 5. Buescher, not really known as well, you can't really say he's not really known as a competitive short track driver because, of course, he got his start in the ARCA Racing Series and developing up that way. But we haven't seen him, at least in the Cup Series, competing as well up there. Let me look at some of his statistics here further back. Looking at his Cup Series results. This was his 7th start at Richmond. And yes, prior to this, never had a top 10 finish at Richmond. His best finish was actually 17th in his first Richmond start driving for JTG Darty Racing just 2 years ago. Other than that, he had no other finishes better than 24th, although he had never failed to finish a race at Richmond, which is also good. So you see where he's able to build up the momentum there. Buescher ultimately finishing in the 22nd spot. So, but the finish, again, not necessarily indicative of how good he did during the race there, finishing 2 laps down behind Ty Dillon. Was given the leaders quite a bit of trouble there towards the end of the race there. But Ty Dillon eventually giving way to Martin Truex and the battle up front. Let's see. Also, another one, Paul Menard, also got a lot of mentions during the broadcast. Good to see him get a 10th place finish there in the Menards Ford. As mentioned, and kind of pulled up his statistics here earlier. Prior to this race, he had only one finish better than 13th at Richmond, which was a 5th back in 2013. This time, he's unofficially listed in the 10th spot here, so that would be clearly his 2nd best finish at Richmond in all the starts that he's made out there. Austin Dillon snuck through with a good 6th place run there, so good showing for him. Looking at some of the other runs further back. But, yeah, I mean, definitely a different race. I mean, it was interesting to see, again, people getting strung out a bit more. It almost felt like a race that didn't have stages at all. A lot of the Richmond races in recent years have had a very green look to them, even with these stages in them. You think back to what was mentioned online, the guy climbing the catch fence during one long green flag run, and some of these rather dominant or even fuel mileage finishes coming down to it. But different set of circumstances this time. Good to see that people closed up and it had a really good bit of drama there at the finish. It was interesting to see Clint, some comers and goers. Kind of felt like a classic Jeff Gordon win in that sense, where you would see somebody kind of chip away a little bit at a lead and try to catch up to somebody and have enough time to get up there. Didn't think that was even possible with the new format with everything, but good to see. Whether it's an anomaly or if this is a sign of things to come, one would certainly hope. We had a little bit of both from these last couple of weeks when we had the dominant run for Brad Keselowski at Martinsville. And then on the other hand, at Bristol, you had a very competitive race where Kyle Busch comes back from the damage to the rear of his car and ends up having a great race with his brother. This one seemed to be kind of a little bit of a medium there, that you had at one time dominance, certainly Kyle Busch included in that mix, and then at the other end, still a close finish. So be interested to know if that's as much of a role in the what NASCAR is working on, or if the aero package is something that these teams are really figuring out. But we'll see what happens on that front. It really seemed like you were going to get something pretty close there. But Richmond, again, it's interesting seeing at the finish of this particular race. At Richmond, you can have that run where somebody's holding the high lane, you can draw up alongside of them, you just can't clear them, and you get that little bit of run there. And Truex was certainly working that to his advantage. And I'm not sure if it's necessarily it is surprising that he finally did win at a short track here, although he'd come so close so many times, especially here at Richmond. It seems like of the different short tracks, perhaps this is a track that Truex was going to be favored to finally end that streak. This was this is a track that very much is almost like a very miniature 1.5-mile track since the 1988 reconfiguration. But a good finish for him there. So again, still waiting to see what happens in the official results here, and we check out more of the news here. Let me pull up the rest of the tweets here in the meantime. It seemed like good to see Clint Boyer and Logano pretty invested in what happened with the race there. They seemed like they were all having a good time out there, and again, that's something you'd like to see more of on a weekly basis. But even under old aero packages, this isn't as typical. But you certainly know to hang on to it and definitely recognize it for what it is when it does happen. So interesting to see. Not seeing any word on inspection quite yet. Let me check the timer again as where we are. We are closing in on the first 30 minutes since approximately when the race concluded. It'll be interesting to see again, talking about this weekend with all the people having their times disallowed and qualifying to lead off the weekend, it definitely kind of changed things at the back of the field. I don't know if that makes it more or less likely that we're going to see anything happen here at the conclusion of the disqualification post-race inspection analysis. But it's we'll see what certainly happens there. Truex, true to form as he had with Furniture Row, tore up the left rear quarter panel as during his burnouts there, very reminiscent of all those times with Furniture Row racing. So they're going to have some fun with that in the inspection queue for sure. Looking back at some other runs, we mentioned Kurt Busch earlier, unofficially shown in the 11th spot, edged by Paul Menard. Well, not edged, about 4 seconds back of him for the 10th spot there. So not as good of a finish as he could have had in the early stages there. Seemed like he was a shoe-in for a top 10 at one point, but didn't quite work out that way. Jimmy Johnson looked like he wasn't going to get much done, but still ended up finishing 12th. I know 12 for Jimmy Johnson doesn't seem like a great run for him, but at least not a necessarily a mid-pack finish. Finishing ahead of two of his teammates there, Chase Elliott and Alex Bowman, finishing further down in the rankings there. And looking further back there, a lot of drivers just completely lost in the shuffle. It's unfortunate that Aric Almirola ended up being 2 laps down in the 23rd spot. A lot of drivers that are further up in the point standings going to get dropped back a little bit. We saw, I didn't get a full look at the lineup there, but it looked like certainly Larson from his issues finishing last today. And also it was I believe Ryan Blaney, or no, it was Stenhouse, the number 17, falling back a little bit in the points. Although Stenhouse finished 16th, ended up being the last car on the lead lap. So we'll see on there. But yeah, but a good finish. Yeah, good. Not maybe not the best race. I would certainly wouldn't call this a great race overall. It was not one that. It was certainly one where I wouldn't say necessarily logging laps, but it seemed like once somebody had the lead pretty well in hand, they pretty much just had it. Although we'd seen some pretty good races, up front very briefly, although the broadcast was a little selective in showing them. I know Truex's pass when he got back up to the lead in the late stages there was caught right when they came back from commercial break. You saw him skating it off of turn 2 to get around there. That was really thrilling to see. Some of the battles there with Joey Logano throwing his hat into the ring there and giving something for Kyle Busch to worry about, and Clint Boyer also being a factor in there. We'd seen Boyer be really good at Richmond last year, and of course a past winner back in 2012 for Michael Waltrip's team. Good to see them have a good race there. And so look further back here. Bailey Curry's thing is still interesting to me. He finished 32nd in the race, 8 laps down in the race there. It was interesting to see Rick Ware's team, as mentioned on Twitter, running the Steakhouse Elite paint scheme on the number 52. And that's a paint scheme that in the past we'd seen J.J. Yaley drive, both for Jonathan Cohen's team, the Team Extreme Racing team, as well as the NY Racing team, the new development of that, ended up being number 7 last year briefly, and then the 23 after BK Racing got sold. We saw that paint scheme just suddenly appear here at Richmond, and by suddenly I do mean that deliberately. One of the first pictures of the 52 that I saw showed the roof was still red, which looked like the same painting that the paint scheme that car had when it had the sponsorship from some of the other brands on there, where they had the blue and white paint scheme. But then the roof was then changed by race night there and had the black and white scheme there matching with everything else. So it was, we've seen this before. I mean, certainly last fall at Phoenix, the Rick Ware team kind of making some last minute decal changes to the car there to get him back out there. But I'm not sure when this deal came together. I wasn't aware of it coming into the race there. But it makes me interested in what's going on again with Jonathan Cohen's team, which has still been missing in action since really the last year when running at Phoenix last fall. Looked like they were going to have something with J.J. Yaley this year. Yaley arrived at Daytona for the photo shoots and the media day. They had a picture of them running a Mustang, and yet instead the sponsorship shows up on a Chevrolet from Rick Ware's team with Bailey Curry and not Yaley driving, and Yaley not even entered in the field. Another piece of the puzzle, still figuring out what's happening with the Cohen team, but nothing new on that front. and certainly nothing new on the Albika Racing Team, which we last saw entered at Texas and then withdrawn. So again, the mystery of both those teams continues now 9 races into the season as we head into the off weekend before the Talladega weekend. So, but yeah, I mean, possible partnership with the Ware team. I mean, again, what the parameters of that is, I'm not sure exactly, but it would be interesting to see. I mean, we'd also seen the Ware team running what appeared to be one of the old TriStar Motorsports cars back at Daytona when they ran the Winn-Dixie paint scheme. That was exactly the same paint scheme and car, it seemed, that Corey LaJoie had run for the 72 team at Talladega the year before. I don't know if it's just an extreme coincidence and they were just taking the same decals from another car and putting them on one of Ware's cars, or if they literally took what was a plate car prepared by the Bryant Smith team and then getting it back out there for the Ware team going there. But it seems like more than a coincidence that they're running that car there. Looking again, the results just refreshed, showing again the official reason out for Kyle Larson would being an accident. Of course, the accident in the crash clock pulling behind the wall. Michael McDowell, the only other driver that fell out of the race, the only other driver with a DNF. Landon Castle did actually finish the race under power, completing 322 of the 400 laps and finishing in the 35th spot. Huff and Gase rounding out the bottom 5. Again, we are still waiting the results from technical inspection as we are now about 36 minutes into the wait for those results. Let's take another look here. And yeah, TriStar possibly running part-time this year. I hadn't heard anything about that. I was wondering if the team had once the team didn't show up in Daytona and I saw the 52 running that paint scheme, I wasn't sure what any plans are there. But again, it's a long season. We saw Cohen's team pop up at I believe the 600 originally, and then at Pocono after that. So certainly it's not too late for teams to jump back in here and try to get something going here at the back of the field. There's certainly spots open with fields being this short. Again, I'm constantly amazed at the 37 cars starting at Richmond. You would think with some of these, every race has the potential of, being one where maybe you don't want to risk damaging your car and having to spend a lot of extra money getting your car fixed back up again. However, they ran so clean and green in most of this race, maybe that wouldn't have been such a bad thing. But again, big kudos to Motorsports Business Management, Carl Long's team, and Joey Gase driving the 66 they brought home. Not only did they bring a beautiful car to the track with all of Sam Bass's works on there, particularly the Richmond programs, but also bringing the car home in one piece and running in the 33rd spot just on the edge of the bottom 5. So a good run for them. I'll be interested to see what they do with the car there. It'd be a shame if they just took decals off or covered them up with something else. It'd be nice if they could somehow preserve that in a way. Although, with Carl Long's team and that being pretty much the only Cup car, the only Cup car in their shop. Obviously, they had, you look back to last fall at Martinsville when they had the fire under Timmy Hill's hood there, and just how much that set them back. Probably, we'll probably expect that car to just keep getting run, and we'll see what they do with the graphics on that one. But it'd be nice if that gets preserved in some kind of way. I mean, I don't know if there's some kind of way to do that, but I know that would be a big cost hit for the Carl Long team and everything. So not holding my breath on that, but a really good paint scheme there. And who knows? Maybe they'll even run it in another race. You never know. Although Talladega would probably be a different deal there. So. And 16 seconds shy of having an average speed of 100 miles an hour. See, I didn't know that. Interesting. Well, it certainly rolled along as fast as it did. Interesting set of circumstances there. But, definitely Martin Truex very happy right now in victory lane, no doubt. Congratulations to him as we now wait for the results from inspection for both his car and the rest of the field. Let's look back at the Xfinity race yesterday. Very different story from what we saw in the race tonight. Almost the opposite, with the threat of rain in the forecast, a threat that extended into today's race here before the forecast cleared up. We were going to have a rain issue over in the Xfinity Series race, and the so-called vortex effect that Darrell Waltrip always likes to bring up seemed to actually be playing a role where large swaths of rain were coming up to the track, and splitting perfectly around the speedway, and they managed to get the entire 250 laps into the race. Cole Custer taking the win in that race over Austin Cindric. Custer, coming out there and outlasting Justin Allgaier and some of the other teams that were up there. Tire strategy ended up being a big factor in that one when you had the rain in the area, not knowing, first of all, if they were going to get to the second stage, and then once they got there, how much further they were going to go from there. It made for a really interesting race with a lot of competition there. And that competition extended as well to the back of the field. You originally had Timmy Hill look like he was going to be the favorite for taking the last spot after a little bit of a trade-off there, where Morgan Shepherd was originally going to be in the field and then withdrew, which bumped the number 21 of Kaz Gralla into the field. Gralla was originally going to be sent home along with the 92 of Josh Williams when qualifying was rained out. However, an arrangement was struck. Apparently, some money's changed hands. The 89 withdrew, and the 21 started the race. And Gralla really capitalized on that. His own particular tire strategy got the 21 and the Hot Scream Chevrolet up towards the front of the field. Ultimately finished a bit further back in and get shaken out back to the 14th spot, but a good showing for him. That kid, again, just continues to impress, getting the very most out of the very least there. We saw that last year with the Fury Race Cars team after the JGL racing debacle, but good to see him get the very best out of the Richard Childress machine there. But that, again, that extended to the race at the back of the field. Once Gralla was climbing up through the pack, you had Timmy Hill citing a vibration on the number 13. Hill had just come off a great 17th place run last week in Bristol. And then over at Richmond here, he had a vibration from the early stages. Ended up making an unscheduled stop, losing, I believe, about 11 laps in the process. Came back out there. And at that point, Jeff Green had also pulled behind the wall in the number 38. Green coming off of an accident last week when a radiator hose came loose, caused him to get in a very hard accident with Ross Chastain that sent Chastain to a backup that he had to run at Richmond. Green running far fewer laps this time around, only 10 laps this time, and ended up finishing last in the event when Hill returned back to the track. Hill ended up citing the vibration once more, had to pull off the track after 15 laps, only 5 laps after the amount that Green had completed. And Hill ended up finishing 37th in the race. 36th was to Mason Diaz, the worst finish this year, unfortunately, for Brandon Built Motorsports. Brown had been swapped out of the 86 as Diaz brought sponsorship from Solid Rock Carriers onto the 86 this week. And they qualify. They didn't qualify because qualifying got rained out, but they benefited certainly from Brown's great start to the season with the 16th starting spot for the number 86. Ended up having the engine let go, problems in turn 1 and 2. Ended up finishing in the 36th position. 35th, Jeremy Clements, another owner driver that has really been struggling this year. Clements had the engine let go down the back straightaway, huge plume of smoke, ended up finishing 35th. Rounding out the group is Chad Fincham, who, again, another motorsports business management car from Carl Long's team, had a brake issue during one of the stages there, was spent several laps behind the wall, and ultimately didn't return to the race, and was the next to last car to fall out of the race, his with brake issues. Engine problems for Brandon Jones put him just on the outside of the bottom 5 of the Joe Gibbs racing car. You mentioned Brandon Brown in the number 86. He ended up picking up a ride with RSS Racing, which this year is a fantastic ride. The 39 and has continued to have a great start this year. Chad Knaus did a good job in the booth and was given a shout out to Ryan Sieg during that race. And indeed, he did have a great finish, getting the top 5 again, finishing the 5th spot. And looking at the points here, that puts Sieg up to 9th in the point standings, 109 out of the lead, and just 2 behind Chase Briscoe in the fully funded number 22 out of Penske Racing. And that really puts that in perspective as to how well Sieg has been doing. And now we go into Talladega, where the RSS Racing team typically has sponsorship for all 3 of their cars. So they should all certainly be ones to watch at Talladega in a couple of weeks. But I mentioned Brandon Brown again, getting back to him, a 20th place finish for him. He clawed his way back up there, got the lucky dog at one point after losing a lap at the 93. He got the ride from Josh Bilicki. Bilicki did not run the race in the 93 and ended up getting a good finish there, finishing in the 20th position, just creeping back in there. He was the next to last car on the lead lap. So a good finish for him. That kept him up at the points and kept his own playoff hopes very much in check. He is now 12th in the point standings, 135 points out of the lead. and just 10 behind Justin Haley in the very fast Colleague Racing machine in the 11th spot. And also not too much further, I believe, let's see, about 19 points back of Noah Gragson in the JR Motorsports number 9. So this is, again, elite company that these drivers are competing with and still having good runs. At the same time, Brandon Jones has Ross Chastain hot on his heels. Chastain in the backup car, number 4, after the accident at Bristol, finished 11th, just got edged by Haley at the finish of the race. That put Ross Chastain 13th in the Xfinity Series Championship, 167 points out of the lead. So a good run for him as well. Continuing to make the very best out of running pretty much just about as many races as he can after the deal with the 42 team fell through. Gray Galding, again, continuing to have a great start to the season, finishing 17th in the SS Greenlight Racing number 08. A good run for him. He has continued to have a streak of just top 20 runs here, except for his problems at Daytona, and I believe at Texas he finished out the top 20 there. Other than that, has continued to really just turn heads in the Xfinity Series after having really a lot of challenges in the Cup Series and not really being a feature in many people's memories in the Cup Series. Galding shows 15th in the point standings, 213 out of the lead. He is now about 9 points behind Brown, and he is ahead of Jeremy Clements as well as other competitors there, including some part-timers such as Jeffrey Earnhardt that are further back. So several very, very good surprises. Also looking at Dylan Bassett. This is our team, again, as much as I criticize Adam Alexander and his tone of broadcasting, it was nice in the overall broadcast that some of these teams did at least get mentioned. Although there were so many, I think it was hard for anybody to keep up with it. Looking at Dylan Bassett making his Xfinity Series debut following his brother up the ranks, driving for DGM Racing. Dylan finishing in the 15th spot, matching Ronnie Bassett Jr.'s best finish this year, 15th at Texas. Good run for him and the Mario Gosselin team. The 90 car, again, I mean, we're seeing a lot of these drivers continue to kind of finish regularly in about the same position. And I think that's something that's really an advantage of not seeing as many of these Cup guys in there, is you can really see what these guys can do, not only in the occasional race, but what they can do on a consistent basis, and showing that what some of these teams are capable of. Certainly, again, Brandon Brown's, the Brandonville Motorsports team, SS Greenlight, and then now DGM Racing is number 90, or 3 that I would certainly underline as being underdogs to watch. And I would almost say at this point that RSS Racing, I almost don't even consider them underdogs anymore, because they are absolutely slamming, pounding on the door on the edge of trying to break through and a win. They're ones that really have to be taken seriously with the Childresses, with the Penske's, and with the other guys that we're seeing up there all the time. Veteran operation, veteran team, they're patching together sponsorships as best they can, and they're right up there on a weekly basis. And I think that's put them on certainly, the edge of being one of those top contenders, but certainly in the same conversation. But underdogs, at least in terms of being an underdog among that group. So good to see for them, and good to see them having a good run. We're looking at more of the finishing results from there. Again, Custer, your winner. Looking further back, Riley Herbst finishing 9th in the Joe Gibbs machine after sitting on the pole, inheriting the pole after the rain washed out. Good to see Elliott Sadler back. Finished 12th there with the Colleague Racing team. Said that was an effort to help Ross Chastain and perhaps landing some more rides in the number 10. I'm not sure. Again, the arithmetic of having Cup guys drive cars to help Xfinity regulars get more starts. I'm not sure how all that works, but apparently it does, because that's at least what the memo always is. But Sadler finishing in the 12th spot. Again, that team continuing to have some good runs. And looking further back to the rest of the field here. Unfortunately, David Starr spun towards the end of the race there. Good thing he avoided any serious damage, ending up finishing 5 laps down for Jimmy Means Racing. The Means team certainly looking ahead to Talladega. That was a track that in interviews, Jimmy Means said it wasn't really his favorite track, even though he's from Alabama. He said that it was more about survival, about just getting to the finish line as best you can. It wasn't a track that he necessarily looked forward to, other than visiting his home state. But however, the 52 team has been another one of those ones that have really turned heads at the plate tracks, and Joey Gase has been a big part of that, getting Means' first top 5 finish at Talladega. But Starr is not one to overlook either. He had some good runs at Talladega not too long ago, driving for other teams. I believe when he was driving for TriStar Motorsports, he was a factor up there just a couple of years ago. So perhaps that pairing will be able to yield some benefits if that turns out that's who's going to be driving the 52 there. But that's pretty much the long and short of it on the Xfinity Series race. We're going to get the last car Xfinity Series article up there. Hey, Corey LaJoy Fan 32, thanks for jumping on board. We're up to 9 people in the chat here. Thank you, everyone, for jumping on board here. We've had a pretty exciting race here, and it's interesting to see how it all shook out. We're still, of course, waiting on inspection results. We don't anticipate, of course, as we do every week, we don't anticipate anything happening there. But we are now about, let's see, my math is not my strong suit here. We are about 50 minutes into the countdown here. We have a little ways to go here, so we're going to continue to wait until the inspection results come back. Checking Bob Pockers's account here, nothing new on that front. Let me open a separate window here, and I'll open the floor to any questions here you guys have, or any things you'd like us to go over here about the race this weekend. Again, unofficially, your last place finishers. You have Jeff Green continuing to return to form. I believe his 7th last place finish at Richmond alone on last night. And then Kyle Larson, the accident, one of only 2 tonight. Larson ended up finishing last for the 6th time in his career. The Cup Series race, the first for number 42 at Richmond since 1994. So an unfortunate set of circumstances for him as he now looks to turn things around this year and heading into Talladega, which is certainly not one of his favorite tracks, but it's just as much of a place where people can turn things around a little bit. So, okay, yeah, they said it was raining during the second stage break on the race last night. Well, that certainly would be interesting. I mean, it was the Richmond race was. I mean, we just finished talking about it there. I mean, the competition. When you have the threat of rain in the forecast, as much as nobody wants rain at a racetrack and interfering with the event, what we had on Friday was the perfect balance of it. That you had an actual competition and actual people working things out that way. So, we've seen this before. A lot of Michigan races, including just last June, have had thrilling races that way. People not knowing when exactly the race is going to end and just racing their butts off. They can't just follow the leader at that point. But that made it interesting. What to expect, looking at your question there, Andrew, what to expect at Talladega with the new package? Not sure exactly. I mean, I'm not really, in terms of the technical aspect, I'm not really that well read about predicting it. I seem to be completely off base when it comes to that. But I certainly hope that it's going to be interesting. I mean, if it's going to bring the field a bit closer together and make us have a little bit more of the pack racing that we've seen. Certainly last year in this spring race, we saw that they had them run at such high speeds they had to reel them back in and change the plates during it. And then in the fall race, you had a 4-car breakaway with the Stewart-Haas racing cars, where they were basically able to just settle the race among themselves. We've seen a little bit of everything from the plate races last year, but with this new package, I mean, I think it could go either way. I mean, we could see a bit of one or the other, but yeah, I'm not exactly sure how it's going to play out. Certainly going to be just as interested as the rest of you guys here. Yeah, I mean, well, if we get back to the 2009 spring race, if we get the 2-car tandem back together, that would be the interesting thing. I mean, of course, NASCAR would have to lighten their rules on the Xfinity Series side about locking bumpers, which is an impossible thing to police. That's another one of those rules that they just have to get rid of. I'm kind of with Brad Keselowski and his frustration after Bristol last week, where he wasn't able to get back in line and ended up costing him a shot at the victory. Getting rid of some of the rules like that, the tandem racing one, that one really has to, they have to get rid of that because that's just getting nuts. Because people are going to be pushing on each other all the time, and the difference between nudging somebody and locking bumpers is such a narrow distinction. And actually, nudging the car is more dangerous than locking bumpers, because when you nudge and back off, then these cars don't have brake lights, and if they did, it wasn't going to be much good. People could bounce off each other, and that's what's causing accidents. That's the thing that I think is always bizarre about all these restrictor plate rules in general, is that none of these seem to do anything to prevent accidents from happening, or doesn't make the racing any safer. In some cases, have made it more dangerous. So what's the point of even having them? If they're not a safety regulation, then what's the point? They just don't like them racing that way. They don't like them sharing radio frequencies or something like that. It's ridiculous. But certainly, anything's on the table. I mean, right now, I mean, Talladega. I mean, this seems to be a race more than any other where, for me personally, I always seem to leave it a bit frustrated because either there's been too many green white checkers and the finish is just a complete crapshoot, or you have a caution that comes out at the very end and you don't get to see people race to the finish line, or you get just some other set of circumstances where it's just complete chaos and somebody who was good at the beginning of the race isn't even a factor at the end of it. That's kind of a frustrating aspect of it. So if we get a race that at least is less frustrating, whatever that would look like, I think that would be fantastic. But I don't know what that would be, quite honestly. Certainly if we get the stranglehold of both the Gibbs and Penske teams, I don't see that changing anytime. I think the Penske guys are going to certainly be ones to watch in that one, after what we saw at Daytona and the duels in particular. I mean, yes, we saw Denny Hamlin win the race and Joe Gibbs group up there, but it took several accidents for that set of circumstances to kind of fall into place. I think really when you have Ryan Blaney still having not won this year, you have Keselowski and Logano still very much factors on a weekly basis. Logano in particular having a good running again tonight, and I don't see him slowing down any going into Talladega in a couple weeks. Penske guys are going to be very tough, I think. And I think that if whoever's going to have to win that race is going to have to take it from them, because I think they're going to work together pretty well. I think Ryan Blaney would be probably one to look at there as potential to actually kind of break through and get his first win of the season. We've seen him win crazy races from before, like winning at the Roval just last fall, and then having a good run at Daytona in just last year. Had a decent run in the duels here this year as well. So I think that would be interesting to see. I think Gibbs will certainly be up there again. I mean, Truex winning and getting that issue off his back with the short tracks is certainly going to be liberating, and he can now look ahead to maybe racking up some restrictor plate victories here and do something at Talladega. Excuse me. But let's see. I'd certainly. I mean, I'm certainly partial to having anybody like unusual pulling off something at the race there, and that's going to be something that kind of looking ahead, something that's going to be competitive there. Michael McDowell has really had a struggle the last few weeks, but we've seen him really good at the plate races. I'd be curious if he brings back the same car that he got the top 5 with at Daytona. I would think that maybe he's going to hang on to that one for Daytona in July, since he was so good at that race last year. And this car that he had in the 500 seemed even better than that, because it made it to the end and held his own even after Clint Boyer crossed his nose there and took himself out. It'll be interesting to see what he can do in the July race there. Maybe at Talladega, you can try to get a car that's a little bit more disposable, perhaps. Although for Front Row Motorsports, I'm not sure how many disposable cars they would have. We'd certainly find out. Among other dark horses here, I mean, we're going to speculate certainly at this point, because now we have Talladega is going to be a couple weeks away, and we got the spring break between now and then. Ross Chastain will be interesting to see. We have the Xfinity and Cup Series double in both races. I think he could probably get something done there. Although, I mean, it'll also depend on how many entrants we get in the race. Luckily, the 15 is a locked-in ride, so they're not going to do anything crazy with the engine or the setup there before. But we see with a lot of open teams, it seems like the hazard of picking them in your fantasy group is that they get a great qualifying run, or they start the race, but then they have to go in the garage area right at the beginning to set the car back. We saw BK Racing do that before, just last year or the year before. And then even before that, I remember John Wood had to do that a couple times when he was driving for the Wood brothers back in 2008. Lost several laps, ended up being further back, and he just kind of counted on outlasting other people that were wrecking to get at least salvage some kind of a finish out there. Hopefully we don't see as much of that. I mean, we've seen teams like the Beard Motorsports team, seeing the number 62 with Brendan Gaughan come back, I anticipate. Will be certainly one to watch there at the race if he makes the show. But a lot of things up in the air on that, and it'll be interesting to see. The Xfinity Cup weekend in the spring race tends to be pretty wild, and that'll be something to see. Let's take a look here. Yeah. And Matt Tiff, that's interesting. Okay, yeah, that's a good point to bring up there. And yeah, see, I keep forgetting about Matt Tiff. You're right. Yeah, there's 3 front row motorsports cars now. We're back to the 2013 status, or 2000 thereabouts, back when Josh Wise was driving for him. We got the 36 back now. Tiff had a good run at Phoenix as well, so he's got a little bit of momentum going. We didn't really see much of him at the race tonight, but you make a good point about his Xfinity Series performances. I mean, he had very different equipment in those races, certainly. Getting the advantage of driving for Gibbs back then, but yeah, again, front row motorsports always seems to find a way to get back up there, especially if they're driving the number 34 car, which is where I give the benefit to McDowell. Seems like for whatever reason, the 38 car just can't break through. They keep getting very, very close. Even Reagan himself, after winning in the 34 at Talladega, couldn't quite win the July Daytona race against Ricky Stenhouse and ended up falling back at that point. The 36 car, I'll be unsure where they fall in all of that, but certainly be interesting to see. Matt Tiff certainly one to watch going forward. Okay, we've got an update from Bob Pockris. Post-race tech typically takes 90 to 120 minutes, so it'll be a little bit before we get results. So no results from inspection at this point. Where are we on the time here? We are now just over an hour into the wait here for results. So we're still a little ways from here. Let's look at the Cup Series results here. Let me, in the meantime, share the Last Car Xfinity article. I believe I already have that one completed and queued up. We'll get that pulled up for you guys here so you have something to look at. Get this queued up here. While I get this pulled up here, you guys like my new shirt here? I just picked this up last week. It's a little bit of kind of like almost a hidden eye picture here. Just take a look here. You can't quite see it there in that shot, but there you go. Get kind of the hidden eye picture there. Oh, I kind of wrinkled it up there a little bit. There you go. Kind of take a look there. Something a little bit different from the racing theme this week here, but I think it kind of stands out a little bit. But I didn't see the Sasquatch in the picture there right away, but I just thought it was just mountains and trees at first, and then I was like, okay, yeah, I'm sold at that point. But there's that one. Let's see. Yeah, Corey LaJoie or Chris Buescher at Talladega. That would be good ones to see. LaJoie, I mean, it'll be I don't know if it'd be great if he ran the face car again like he had at Daytona and Atlanta. I haven't heard anything go one way or the other about the deal there, but 32. Oh, excuse me. It's not as late on here on the West Coast as it is for some of you guys, but I'm still gotta get a little bit more Mountain Dew to get over the hump here. All right. But yeah, the 32 team, I wouldn't rule them out at all. They've had a past of getting themselves into 1:21 a.m. Man, yeah. See, there you go. There's the time difference already. This is the part of the season where you don't know what's going to happen exactly. I like that the spring Talladega race is still early enough in the season that you still get a chance at having a good run, and you don't know exactly what everybody has quite yet, so they can still surprise you. As for Chris Buescher, I mean, yeah, certainly again the attention that he got tonight in the race. I thought he was going to be much better at Daytona than he turned out to be. He was actually my fantasy pick in our unofficial contest here on this end between myself and my brother. I had really thought 37 was going to break through because his runs at Daytona in particular were really impressive. It seemed like he was consistently surviving all these accidents and getting top 5 runs or top 10s, even failing that. Unfortunately, his luck ran out in the February race this year, got collected in the biggest wreck there that Matt DiBenedetto got tangled up in. And that brings us to the next one. Let's look and see what happens with the 95 car. Matty D, has had, we haven't seen a whole lot of him since Daytona, although he was, he had a good run at Bristol going, if I remember correctly. was really starting to kind of, turn some heads here a little bit at some of these other races. But the 95 car, that's going to be one to really watch. And with the Joe Gibbs power and that team continuing to excel, that's only going to help the 95 team with their technical alliance. Will we see him up front and leading a draft that's catching up to the back of the field? I'm not sure. Although, I mean, with the long green flag run we saw at Richmond here tonight, perhaps it could work out that way at Talladega and make for something really interesting. So the 95 team, can't overlook that for sure. Yeah, you mentioned Bobby Labonte, his good runs at Daytona there. Still amazing to me that he never, won the Daytona 500. Again, another driver that seemed like he was always very much a factor there, but still having some good runs there. The number 18 finished last the event towards the end of his career with Joe Gibbs Racing. But yeah, you mentioned him driving with 32 car. Years later, seemed to have some good runs there. I believe in the Daytona, the 500 in 2012, I think he was up there for a while. Or was that Terry Labonte? I think that was Terry. I might be remembering that wrong. Bobby came in afterwards. But yeah, Bobby in the July race in 2016. I have to search my memory on that one, but I think you're right. Yeah, he had a good showing in that. Yeah, 2012 was still Terry. That's right. That was the jet dryer one that Terry was in. So you had a different set of circumstances there. All right. Just another glance at the results here. Looking at Eric Jones, 14th in the Cup race there. Impressive, given that he had to make that unscheduled stop for a wheel spacer there towards the end of the race there. So good, good finish for him. Oh, I was going to give you the Xfinity article. Let me do that too. Got a lot of irons in the fire here. We get those pulled up. Kind of a shorter article here because, again, it's in their Jeff Green feature. But we're going to go ahead and post that, and I'll give you guys the first look at that. And we'll get that online here. And there it is. We'll update these statistics, and we'll get the Cup Series article up later tonight. Looks like it's going to be Kyle Larson absent the results that we're still waiting for from inspection. There's the Xfinity article there. And so we got that. Let's see here. As the night wears on here, we are now still waiting at any moment here. We could potentially have a note. We have an update from Pockrass here. Okay, still no updates here on the channel. You see, Pockrass posted 3 minutes ago. Usually we see drivers go to the rear for the start, able to drive up to the front, and not tonight. Hamlin was the only one of tech-failed cars to finish inside the top 11. So an interesting statistic there about the drivers that were sent to the rear, including many of the big teams out there. Jimmy Johnson, again, another one of those that was close up there, at least showing him in the 12th spot. So a ways behind Hamlin, but still in the top 15. Still a disadvantage for a lot of those drivers out there. As long as the Richmond race feels, it still is enough time to get lost in the shuffle there. So that's a different set of circumstances. It's interesting to see the races at Richmond kind of play the way out that they did. I think there was somebody that posted online about the number of cautions that we've seen in Richmond races during this decade versus the last decade, and how much that's dropped off. That's certainly one measure you could weigh in as to the level of competition, or perhaps the intensity of it. It seems like in the later years here, we've seen the Richmond race really be more of kind of like almost feeling like a mile-and-a-half race where people get strung out because you just have so many options for different lines to run. Richmond has always been interesting. I like the visuals of it. I've never been to the track myself, but I like how it always looks on TV. It has a really nice, fast look to it. And it being small enough that you can see all the action happening. There's not really any blind spots, it seems, for most of the seats. And they really ramped up their fan amenities by doing this, the public access to the garage area, much like we saw at Phoenix last fall. So, it seems like it's a really good race to see in person. Perhaps it's just really difficult to broadcast. Although, watching some of these older broadcasts, certainly, again, 1994 coming up a lot in the research leading up to this week. Just kind of watching some of the clips from those races there and just seeing how competitive those races looked. And pulling back the camera a bit to see how people running different lines and running as competitively as they can makes for some interesting television. This will be one I'll have to definitely mark off the list here at some point here and run that, whichever events they have running up here. But that'll be interesting. Again, for those of you new to the channel, in case you've come back into the channel here for the first time, first race that I'm looking to cover again in person this year is still going to be the Sonoma Raceway, also known as the last race that Darrell Waltrip is going to be broadcasting for the booth for Fox Sports, and the return of the carousel at the Sonoma Raceway in commemoration of their 50th anniversary of the track. Should be really interesting. That's still subject to change, of course, because there's approval processes you have to go through. I'm not a hard card member, so I have to go through the same protocol as the more limited media outlets out there. But certainly we're aiming to cover the event there and have that be the start for coverage for 2019. After that, the plan is to look ahead towards running the race at or covering the race at Mosport for the Truck Series and the NASCAR Pinty Series in August. We have a connection with our friend Robert Taylor, the artist up there in Canada. We're hoping to do a trip up there for that one. That's the first one really out of the state that we're looking at. Oh, and Corey LaJoy fan, I seem to have surprised you. Yes, the carousel, they announced this just over the offseason, I believe. They are going to run the carousel. It's no bite about it. They are going to run it. They're going to run the race. It's going to be 90 laps. They just announced the stage links this week. I believe Pockris tweeted about that this week. And they're going to they're going to run the carousel. Still going to be, they're still going to call it Toyota Safe Mart 350, which I believe is why it's 90 laps and not 74 like it was back in the day. Although the track, I'm sure, has had some subtle changes since 1997 to make it different. But yes, this is definitely a race that you're going to want to check out, because it's going to be very interesting to see what happens in the practice sessions. I'm still waiting to hear if they're going to do any test sessions with Goodyear to kind of see how these cars are going to handle the carousel, maybe give some of these teams a little bit of an advantage. I know that they usually have the practice sessions, especially the first on the first day there at Sears Point, tend to be pretty long, especially happy hour. It usually goes for a couple hours out there, so give everybody plenty of time to get their cars shaken down. So maybe they've done that in place of these tire tests out there. So that'll certainly be interesting. I believe the stages are at 30 and 60. I'm not 100% on that. Let me check that. Raceway stages. We'll look that up. Okay, it's 20, 40, and 90. That's the post from April 10th. So lap 20, lap 40, and lap 90. So the final stage will be 50 laps, which is quite a distance actually. It's going to be having a different set of circumstances there. Let's see. This has changed from the previous format. I mean, I'm seeing when I'm looking at this on the Twitter page here, I'm seeing the stages from last year and the old configuration with the chute. It used to be at 25 laps, and 60 laps. So 5 laps fewer but slower laps for those first 2 stages. And then 10 laps fewer for the 3rd stage. So, yeah, that's going to be really interesting to see. That's going to be really interesting to see what happens there. It would be, yeah, I see what you're saying, Andrew. Yeah, it'd be great to see some road ringers come back out here. I'm hearing from a source there may be at least one. I don't have any names, but it sounds like somebody is in the mix there. So maybe we'll at least have somebody give a try at it. But I'm hearing that there may be that's a potential there for a road course, at least one road course ringer in the mix. But again, nothing confirmed. I don't have a name, but I do have a source that's close to one of these teams that says they've at least explored that option. So not sure. We'll see what happens there coming ahead. It's going to be it's going to definitely be interesting. We're coming down. We're coming down to just over 2 months up to that race, and that's always the most exciting time of the year. We're going to be about the same time of the year in 2020 there. It'll be a week earlier. It's going to be, I believe, on Father's Day weekend, like it did for a couple of years back in like 2008, 2009. So we'll see what happens there. Let me check the Threads here again. Still no results here on this. You have the Cup playoff grid posted by Pockrass on his channel or on his Twitter feed here. Still showing Kyle Busch as your points leader overall with his 3 race wins. Joey Logano second in the point standings with Hamlin. And Harvick, even without his wins, being still 4th overall. So he is continuing to have good runs that are keeping him up there. And certainly once he does finally break through and end Stewart-Haas Racing's streak without a win this year, it's really going to help out the number 4 team. They'll be right in the mix of it here in the playoff grid. And but again, he's still winless going into Talladega, and a Talladega race where anything can happen. And Harvick, past winner, had that photo finish with Jimmy McMurray years ago. And he's going to certainly be one to watch there too with everybody else. Let's take a look here. Yeah, I don't want to speculate as to who's running what at Sonoma, but yeah, 77 team could be a possibility. Maybe one of these other operations out there. It's been interesting to see which operations even consider the option of a road course ringer, and what exactly is aimed to be accomplished during that. Looking further back here. And let's see. Still not seeing it here. Looks like it was Dick Brooks' birthday today. There we go. Happy birthday to him. He would have been 77 today. So thank you to Blaze Zebratar for posting that on Twitter. It's a shame. You don't. Both he and the Don Levy team no longer a part of the sport. I think that would have been unthinkable at one point years ago for both Dick Brooks and the Jimmy Don Levy operation. Don Levy having given so many young drivers a chance, their first Cup Series start. You, of course, have drivers like Ken Schrader that worked their way up the rankings after that, and all the way up to current spotter Jason Deleski. You have a lot of different competitors out there. It's really kind of interesting to think about a team that's kind of filling that Don Levy role. I think Rick Ware's team seems to be almost close to that. I know the specter of pay drivers is one of those things that maybe makes us look at that a little differently than it did back in the past. But we've seen with drivers like Bailey Curry, like with BJ McLeod, and drivers such as that getting their chances out there. Certainly there's still teams and opportunities for guys to get up there, but of course, in the Cup Series these days with charters and with sponsors and everything, there's so many more obstacles that are in the way, and we don't see it 1-to-1 like we did with Mr. Don Levy all those years ago. But that's a different story entirely. And yeah, Don Levy ran for Hidleski. Yeah, I believe in 2002 was Hidleski's only Cup Series start. It was in the same race Jamie McMurray took his first Cup Series win driving for Sterling Marlin. And I believe Hidleski was the last person to actually qualify and start a Don Levy car. Don Levy, they attempted some more races, I believe, for the next couple of seasons there. Never started another one, but their last green flag was at least back in 2002. I seem to remember that because Hidleski ended up, unfortunately, finishing last in that event with an early exit in that one, and became kind of a smaller part of the story that built up around Jamie McMurray. So we're going to go ahead and take another look here at the results. Nothing yet. Still waiting on the inspection queue here. It's now about 9 p.m. here Pacific time. Appreciate you guys hanging with me here. It's going to be interesting looking forward ahead on more of these disqualification shows for these evening races. Certainly a different atmosphere from the day races, and but I work night shift, so it's not too unusual. 4 I'm used to 4 a.m. being my lunch break, so that's kind of a different set of circumstances there. But here on the West Coast here, at least with some of these races on the East Coast here, we don't have them quite as late at night, but it makes it interesting. Let's see. There we go. I see 60 here in the chat room again. Thank you for sticking with me here. We'll go ahead and just plug my Patreon here. In the meantime, we got some bonus content. I'm still looking to lock up here for the Patreon, patreon.com/lastcar on Brock. We've been doing some stuff with the terrible broadcasts in recent weeks, putting advance, giving everybody that's Patreon members on there advance access to that. Kind of seeing some of the, whenever I have like a new idea or a new thought with the website, I kind of like to try to run it by on there first, kind of get some thoughts there without leaking it to everybody else. Initially, we did some infographics actually at the beginning of this month. That's kind of been the latest phase of this. I was kind of working on a template to kind of break down some of the more compelling statistics in the sports history as to last place finishers. I saw one of them got reposted on Reddit just this past couple of weeks ago. We were talking about the most Cup Series starts before scoring their first last place finish across the top 3 series. Certainly Kevin Harvick's being top of that list, Jimmy Johnson, and so many others. We also mentioned one of the longest streaks that we're seeing in the Xfinity Series just came to an end last year with Jeremy Clements, and then I believe 2 years before that in the Truck Series with Matt Crafton. You see people make triple-digit starts in single series and before ever finishing last, and that really shows how consistent some of these drivers are. And it may not be the names that you immediately think of right away. There's a lot of times where I'm doing these articles and somebody's trailing down in the falling down to the back of the field, and I pull up the statistics and say, well, shoot, this person must have finished last sometime before. They've been in the sport, 10 years, maybe 15 years, something like that. And then you get something like Regan Smith last fall. And sure enough, he hadn't finished last, I believe it was 224 starts in the Cup Series. Highly unusual. I know he'd been in and out of the circuit, and of course now he's a broadcaster, filling that role more than anything. But finishing last in that event there when they had those mechanical issues at the beginning of the very start of the Homestead race, basically missing the start and getting back out there, made for a different set of circumstances. But looking to do some more infographics like that. And kind of previewing those in the Patreon. And if you guys have any other ideas about Patreon content or any suggestions to kind of grow that and provide better incentives in there, I'm really trying to kind of fine tune every aspect of it that I can. My first step was to kind of really reel in the reward levels and stuff and make sure that everybody from $5 and up has some kind of a reward tier. We have like the bumper stickers for the $5 level. For the $10 level, I send you a note there with a personalized statistic as well as a hand-picked diecast from my own collection. It's a loose diecast to make it a little bit easier on the shipping there, but something relevant to that driver, that car number, or that paint scheme, perhaps, kind of bring that up there as a little incentive. And then the $25 level, we have some special T-shirts there. It shows 2019 sponsor on it. Really exciting stuff there going forward. And I really do appreciate people who have signed up for that so far there. Again, we're a small organization, so every little bit helps. It doesn't have to be a big thing or anything like that. But, anything that helps us, put that on there, give us a little bit more ability to, do as many races as possible and give you the kind of coverage that we've done at Phoenix and Watkins Glen and Darlington in the past. And of course, the Sonoma Raceway. Our plan is still, again, to do the Sonoma Raceway and then Mosport. And then we're looking at the Phoenix and Texas double in November. That's kind of on a long shot where it's kind of a stretch goal for this year, but we're still putting it on the schedule and hoping to do something with that to kind of link those together and increase our presence at these tracks and basically just knock as many of them off the list as possible. So that's where we are on that right now. Let me look on here. Let's see. Still nothing new on this. How close are we now with the inspection results here? We are now very close. We are about 1 hour and 23 minutes in our wait here since the conclusion of the race. Still looking for any other information here. Yeah, I apologize. I'm sounding stuffed up. It's allergy season already here, and that's definitely kicking in. So we're going to definitely try to stay on top of that. Kyle Busch, 101 laps led tonight, ends up finishing in the 8th spot, which would be a poor run for him given the great runs he's already had for most of the season. Did not lead the most laps, though. Truex ends up with that with 186. So it just shows how that race turned the corner there. Let's see. Okay, we are hearing. We may have a call. We are getting this from Sirius XM NASCAR Radio. Posted 1 minute ago live from the post-race inspection area with Series Director Jay Fabian. Claire B. Lang makes it official. Number 19 is clear and is your Toyota Owners 400 winner. So you heard it here, folks. Martin Truex Jr. has now officially won a short track race. He has finally won a short track race, and he gets to keep it. So that is the result on here. Waiting for confirmation now from some of the other ones here. It looks like we should be hearing that from Pockrass's channel and some of the others, but we are hearing this at least from the Sirius XM channel. This again posted 2 minutes ago. It's approximately 12:11 a.m. Eastern time, and that's the set right now. So it looks to be that is the story, and I think that's going to be good right now. So again, Martin Truex Jr., your winner. We have Truex, your winner. Kyle Larson, your last place finisher of today's race at Richmond. So I'm going to go ahead and we're going to start with that. Kyle Larson is going to be your feature tonight on LastCar. Expect that article a bit later tonight. The Xfinity article already up on the website at lastcar.info. Thank you again, everyone, for tuning in. Hope you enjoyed the race tonight and enjoyed going over the event here. Have a very enjoyable spring break. We have the off week next week for the Xfinity Series, Truck Series, and the Cup Series. We return to Talladega in a couple weeks. We'll do the disqualification show after that, which should be very interesting for a restrictor plate event. But in the meantime, again, congratulations to Martin Truex Jr. Unfortunate luck for Kyle Larson, and you'll hear more about that on lastcar.info later tonight. So again, thank you for following me. Twitter at LastCarOnBrock, website lastcar.info, and the Patreon, patreon.com/LastCarOnBrock. So thank you again, and until then, I will see you at the end of the month.